Hello, and happy St Patrick's Day. I'm reminded that when it was St David's Day recently, I completely dropped the ball and totally forgot to record any Welsh myths or stories. And I'm feeling particularly brain dead and lazy at the moment, so I've almost forgotten to do anything to mark this festival of Irish culture. And obviously there are huge numbers of people, not only in Ireland but the whole world over, who are either celebrating their Irish culture and their Irish roots, or are pretending by putting on ginger wigs and wearing green shamrocks and what have you, pretending to be Irish so that they've got an excuse to go out and drink themselves into a state of liver cirrhosis. So today is the day, whether you're Catholic or not, for celebrating all things Irish. I could tell you some Irish myths. There are 101 remarkably good ones, but as I say, my brain is going to mush. So instead, I'm going to tell you a poem, read you a poem, not one of my own. This is a poem by Ethna Carbery, who was a Victorian poetess who was alive in the latter part of the 19th century. She died in 1902, and most of her poetry was published posthumously by her widower. So I'm going to read you one of her poems called The Love Talker, and it's about an Irish fairy called the Guncona. The Guncona is, well, in Christian mythology you've got the incubus, which is a demon that seduces women by appearing as a very handsome man. The Guncona is not a demon, but he's a fairy, a creature of the fairy realms, who comes into this world, and you meet him in lonely spots. And there's various stories of farm girls and milkmaids and what have you, meeting the Guncona in some rural isolated spot, and he's always incredibly handsome and incredibly charming and well-mannered and seductive, and 100 times more charming, more handsome than any of the rustic lads that the young lady has grown up with. So she falls for him, and he seduces her and has his way with her, and then he disappears off back to the realm of fairy, and he leaves her pining for this impossibly perfect man, because compared to him all of the lads in the village are just dull as ditch water. And so these young ladies end up wasting away with lovesickness, which is a theme that crops up a fair amount in Irish folklore, the lovesickness of Cuchulainn and so on, of people who are struck down with romance, struck down with love, and whilst it is unrequited, they just sort of starve themselves away to nothing. So it's quite a common thing. I'll read you the poem in a moment, but thinking in terms of my own circumstances, obviously I'm not some Irish farmer. The beard might have given that one away, let alone the accent. But the notion of a handsome, charming, seductive fairy force that lures you away and makes the local people seem dull by comparison. My own spirituality is heavily influenced by Irish mythology, Irish traditions and folklore, rather than the kinds of deities that would have been worshipped and reverenced by the Akini or the Trinovantes or one of the various tribes that occupied chunks of Suffolk 2,000 plus years ago. Largely because we know virtually nothing about the local deities, almost nothing at all. So it's not because they are dull in comparison, it's because they're invisible in comparison. Whereas we know quite a lot, well, reasonable amount, about Irish mythology and Irish folklore. So there is a sort of a romancing away, a seduction by the Irish sources, for me at least, which pulls me in that direction rather than looking to local sources, which are just, as I say, largely forgotten and invisible and lost. Am I going to pine away and die? Well, I expect quite a lot of people wish I would, but not in the immediate future. So, this is The Love Talker by Ethna Carbery. I met the love talker one eve in the glen. He was handsomer than any of our handsome young men. His eyes were blacker than the sloe, his voice sweeter far than the crooning of old Kevin's pipes beyond in Cool Nagar. I was bound for the milking with a heart fair and free. My grief, that bitter hour drained the life from me. I thought him human lover, thought his lips on mine were cold, and the breath of death blew keen on me within his hold. I know not what he may come, no shadow fell behind, but all the sighing rushes swathed beneath the fairy wind. The thrush ceased its singing, a mist crept about. We two clung together with the world shut out. Beyond the ghostly mist I could hear my cattle low, the little cow from Ballinar, clean as driven snow, the dun cow from Kerry, the roan from Inisheer. Oh, pitiful their calling, and his whispers in my ear. His eyes were afire, his words were a snare. I cried my mother's name, but no help was there. I made the blessed sign, then he gave me a dreary moan. A wisp of cloud went floating by, and I stood alone. Running ever through my head is an old-time rune. Who meets the love-talker must weave her shroud soon. My mother's face is furrowed with the salt tears that fall, but the kind eyes of my father are the saddest sight of all. I have spun the fleecy lint, and now my wheel is still. The linen length is woven for my shroud fine and chill. I shall stretch me on the bed where a happy maid I lay, pray for the soul of Mary Och at dawning of the day. There we go. Beware of handsome strangers in lonely spots.